Good morning. I'm Debbie Billings with Heritage Realty and J&D Properties and the Vice Chair of the Infrastructure Council at the Knoxville Chamber. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm joined by Nancy Neighbors, the Director of Regional Enhancement for the Knoxville Chamber. And we are grateful to have all of you here today for this panel discussion about the recommendations presented in Infrastructure Redefined, the newest strategy of the Knoxville Chamber's 5-year strategic vision, Path to Prosperity. Today, we'll dive into the region's current growth as well as short and long-term solutions for several key areas of our infrastructure. Throughout the presentation today, please feel free to enter any questions that you have into the Q&A, and we will work to answer these as time allows at the end of the discussion. Before we get started, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce one of Knoxville Chamber's sponsors to say a few words. Cook Brothers Homes is a sponsor of the Chamber Infrastructure Ecosystem and is the reason we're able to deliver this program and others like it. We greatly appreciate their support. Please allow me to introduce John Cook, President and CEO of Cook Brothers Homes.
Thank you, Debbie, and good morning, everyone. Very proud to be a part of this group. Cook Brothers Homes is a residential home builder. We also are a developer and have a number of commercial properties spread all over East Tennessee. One of the reasons I'm so excited to be, part of this, and I'm glad that this is being done, is my brother and I moved here 20 years ago. That we chose Knoxville as our place to move to and to start business. And 20 years ago, Knoxville looked a lot different. Part of the reason we chose Knoxville was we thought there was great growth opportunity, but also enjoyed the fact that traffic was not crazy horrible. There was access, around town to a lot of different things. And there was a lot of growth going on. And 20 years later, we have all of those same things, but we have some challenges. And we're very active in the community and would like to be helpful in at least giving our insight, into how to maybe alleviate those challenges. So very pleased to be a sponsor of this and to help Knoxville continue to move forward, the Knoxville area continue to move forward as we move into the next few years and continue the growth pattern that we're on.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to introduce the panelists of our discussion on interstate congestion, housing and development, and broadband. Please welcome, I don't think Steve's on yet, is he? Steve Borden will be on, Director and Assistant Chief Engineer for Region 1 of the Tennessee Department of Transportation. Senator Becky Massey of the Tennessee State Legislature and Chairman of the Senate Transportation and Safety Committee. Hanson Sale, Government Affairs and Policy Director for the Knoxville Area Association of Realtors, and Crystal Ivey with the Broadband Fiber Team for the Knoxville Utilities Board. So we'll start with Nancy.
Good morning, Senator Massey. We'll start with you and with one of the hot topics, electric vehicles. They are expected to increase dramatically in the near future. Have discussions occurred at the state level about potential solutions to revenue loss from gas and diesel fuel taxes?
With you. But as far as the conversations about electric vehicles and the transitioning of that, absolutely. We have been discussing that both at the state level and at the national level. I've just recently gone to a couple of national conferences, and it is always on the agenda. What we've got to do, though, is to develop a sustainable transportation funding mechanism which addresses all road users, and we will actually need to develop it pretty soon. Like it or not, electric vehicles are in our future. In Tennessee, what's neat though is Tennessee is going to be the national leader in the production of electric vehicles. We've already have several electric vehicle manufacturers, and the Ford manufacturer's getting ready to do that, their truck over in West Tennessee in the Blue Oval City. So at present, just to kind of give people a little bit up to speed on what's happening nationally as we move toward that and that we'll be looking at, There are two key ways that states are moving towards funding their road system as we are looking at moving away from the gas user fee or the gas tax. One is registration fees and one is road usage fees. Some states are applying a separate registration fee for certain hybrid or electric vehicles. These fees come in addition to the standard motor vehicle registration fees, and proponents believe the fees help bring equity among drivers by ensuring all drivers pay for using our roadways. State fees range right now from $50 to $225, and our current fee is $100 per year to register an electric vehicle. I'm sure as we move forward, we will be discussing what really is the appropriate amount there. Now, on the other hand, on the road usage fee, there are a number of states that have done or are doing pilots on this road usage fee, or sometimes it's called a mileage-based user fee. The longest running program started in 2013 in Oregon. Drivers are charged 1.8 cents per mile for trips that take place on the state's roads. Participants are given the option of using a GPS device to record their miles or using a non-GPS option that tracks usage based on the mileage odometers of cars. In Utah, the law requires owners of alternative fuel vehicles to pay an additional fee during annual vehicle registration, or they can enroll in a road usage charge program. So there's several different programs out there. There's several different pilots. Tennessee is a member of the Eastern Transportation Coalition, and this is made up of 17 states and the District of Columbia, and represents actually 40% of the population in our country. This coalition has conducted user fee pilots, both for personal vehicles and commercial trucks. People who, a few things they found on people that have participated in pilots is, though people value transportation, they don't realize there's a funding problem. People have privacy concerns about the mileage-based user fee until they experience it firsthand and they realize it's not that bad. Rural drivers often fare better in a mileage-based user fee system than they do now, which is kind of against what you would think. And pay for what you use really resonates with people, but it's still complicated for people to understand. One thing we will have to make sure of as we move forward is to capture the revenue from out-of-state vehicles who drive in our state, which is a huge revenue generator for us now. I would like Tennessee, as we move forward, to conduct a pilot of our own and just see how it kind of works for us personally. And as we move forward, though, I'm sure we were going to be discussing this often. But we'll keep watching it.
Thank you, Senator. For the next question, I'd like to ask, Tennessee is expected to receive $5.8 billion for highways and $302 million for bridges over the next 5 years under the recently passed federal infrastructure bill. How should our region position itself to receive the benefit of those new dollars?
Well, first, I trust that our local and community leaders will be involved on a state level to provide input on how these funds need to be spent and prioritized in East Tennessee. We need to have a coordinated regional response, much like the Nashville area does, and we need to make sure we're not working in silos. So that would include our elected officials, our community leaders, and our wonderful TDOT folks, especially Steve Borden, welcome. And, that we're all working together in our transportation organization too. So some of the things that I'm already doing is I met actually this week with the Commissioner of Finance, and we just kind of briefly touched it that we need to be looking at that. And next week, we're meeting, the House Transportation Chair and I are meeting with the interim commissioner of TDOT to discuss this. The common conception is that we could see this playing out in several ways. One, it could speed up the Improve Act projects, or we could add new projects statewide to the project list, or it might just absorb the increase in the cost of building roads. And so it may end up being a combination of all three, but the conversations will be started. Our Knox County legislative delegation recently met with Steve Borden and his staff to discuss road projects and issues. And this week, we also met with the Transportation and Planning Organization to continue these discussions. So it is very top of the mind for our folks and for everyone, but we do need to all be working together. And I really do think that the Infrastructure Council is a good start at getting people educated, working together, and the programs that you guys have presented has really been helpful to kind of bring us all up to speed.
Thank you, Senator. And the Infrastructure Council that you just referenced is the Chamber's council made up of local business and organizational representatives that Debbie leads and I help her manage. The next question is related to the bill. How can our area benefit from other infrastructure funding besides roads and bridges?
Well, the Infrastructure Jobs Act also includes for Tennessee it's estimated $633 million for public transportation, $100 million to help provide broadband coverage and help for low-income families. It's basically estimated that it will help 402,000 Tennesseans have service who currently lack it, and it will be some subsidies or financial help to pay for low income, about a third of Tennesseans, actually, almost 2 million people, to help there. 88 million will be there to expand the EV charging networks in Tennessee. And, you know, we met with the Ford executives this week, and that's real important to them that we get that infrastructure throughout our state. And then there's $697 million over 5 years to improve water infrastructure across the state. And then $300 million over 5 years to improve our airports. And the airports really need that funding too. And we'll talk about that in a minute, I think.
Okay. And my last question for you is, what will be the top issues the Senate Transportation Committee, which you head, will tackle next year?
Great question. We're going to, several things. We're going to continue to work on the Real ID and add the implementation of that. And that they keep extending the deadline because of the pandemic. And it's now extended to May 3rd, 2023. And if things settle down, I think that might actually be the deadline that works. But I think the latest count was we're inching close to 50% of all Tennessee drivers have already gotten their Real ID. So I encourage people that as your driver's license renews, if it renews before this time, get it when it renews. And if you have questions about what to take, make sure you take the right things, but you can contact my office and we can give you the exact thing so you don't have to make a couple of trips there. Airports, as I mentioned, the airports will be offering a way to handle airport funding moving forward. The Transportation Equity Fund, which has been one of the primary funding mechanisms for our airports and improvements there, has been decreasing. And so we expect more information going forward and just kind of looking at the funding mechanism and what's the correct way to keep them funded so we can handle all the customers that are going through our airports. And then, of course, the federal infrastructure bill will provide some of the needed funding for some of their backlogs of improvement projects. We'll continue, as I said, talking about electric vehicles and a possible road usage pilot. And we had redone the billboard bill 2 years ago, and they've been working on the rules on that. So we'll hopefully get the new, that all implemented this year. And I imagine we will look at the scooter law, especially with some recent accidents and deaths. We may look at future legislation there.
Okay, thank you, Senator. The next two questions that I have are for Steve Borden with TDOT. Steve, 4 of Tennessee's 5 highest traffic count stations are in Knoxville. What is planned to alleviate congestion in those areas for the short term?
Thank you. I hope can you hear me? I've had to go through 3 devices this morning, so we're good. Okay, I apologize for that. You're correct. You know, when you look at the total volumes along the interstate corridors, it's counterintuitive when you look at the urban area of Nashville to think that it has the highest volumes along the interstate, but in reality, like you said, 4 of the 5 highest are here, and the highest in the state being there near Hollywood Drive is at 215,000 vehicles a day. That's a big number, and it's continuing to grow when you look at projections. And as you go along the corridor of I-40 to Wesley Road, Bridgewater, and Montview Road, you're looking at numbers around 210,000 to 205,000. Along with that, it's also a very heavy freight corridor. We all know that with I-75, I-81, and I-40, you're talking 81 that empties the eastern seaboard with freight, as well as I-75 and I-40, which connect across the country, north and south, and in east and west for freight. It does have a real challenge because you have truck equivalents on top of those vehicle numbers as well when you look at the high volumes. A lot of things are going on. The Improve Act, as Senator Massey talked about earlier, did identify several places along the corridor that we have for improvements. It has a significant widening section on I-75 and also north and south of town, as well as 81 east of town. Also along the corridor, we have a number of projects that are under development. One of those will be an Improve Act project, obviously in that area where we have 215,000 vehicles, to address that Paper Mill Road, I-40, I-640, 75 interchange there, to improve the efficiencies. One of the things that there are 2 ways to tackle the problem, and as we're walking through that, there's one is to modernize the interchanges and the efficiency and the flow of traffic along the corridor. Those are smaller projects. When I say smaller, they still may be $40 and $50 million. They're not in the $600-700 million range, but you can get a lot of bang for your buck in doing so. At the same time, then you have to look for smart alternatives as well, improving our SmartWay system and things like that that also help our infrastructure work more efficiently. Those are investments. You'll see Smart Corridor that's going on I-24 currently in Nashville to address some of that, to give opportunity to get efficiencies without necessarily adding lanes. At the same time, we have a lot of other things going on. Obviously, the Improve Act identified a lot of projects, 962 of them, that we've been steadily working on. But at the same time, we know that there's more projects that will have to be under consideration. We always have to continue to look at our infrastructure. So some of the things that have been going on currently is that we've had several corridor studies that go along our interstates. These went across the complete state. We recently did an I-55, 75, I-26 corridor study to work on those areas, as well as an I-40, I-81 corridor study as well. When you look at those studies, a lot of things that we're looking at, as Senator pointed out, you're looking at the efficiency and reliable transportation. For all of us, we want reliable transportation. When we get up in the morning, we want to get to our road, we want to get to our jobs, our destination. When you look at infrastructure as a whole, reliable transportation is a big part of the investment you've seen in our states from some really large, high-profile companies that have moved here because they can manufacture and move product very easily. So that's been very, very fortunate to where we're located geographically, as well as a good transportation system. But you're wanting to provide efficient and reliable transportation. At the same time, there's a safety component to that, right? We always have safety on top of our minds. And then you're coordinating those transportation investments with also economic plans, right? Right now in West Tennessee, with Ford coming here, Blue Oval, there's going to be a huge investment in infrastructure, right, to be able to address the need of that. We have the same thing going on in East Tennessee consistently, and you look at what goes on in Sevier County, just east of us. It's an economic driver for the state. As it grows, we have to adapt. As Knoxville grows and we continue around our area grow, we have to adapt to that. And so you're also looking at equity along corridors. We look at multimodal opportunities, transit. All those things are put in together to try to best serve the need of the corridor. Now, out of those corridor studies, now these are studies. I guess you would say they're not projects yet, but there are things that from those studies we develop ideas and needs, right? And looking at those. And for instance, the I-40, I-81 corridor, a sub-study that we're doing right now out of that one, I guess one of the first things that we're looking at out of that study, which is really big, goes all the way across the state, is the I-40 Watt Road exit. Most of us know that one is one that's not had any change since it was developed many years ago, and it's beginning to develop. You've got a lot of traffic and growth in that area, as well as Campbell Station. So right now we're doing some additional studies in those areas, looking at those particular interchanges for efficiencies, upgrades. We're studying things like the diverging diamond that we have out at 407 that a lot of us have used. A single point interchange at maybe at Watt Road or a partial cloverleaf to try to address both the growth and the existing needs that we have right now. So as you walk through a lot of what's going on, and we also have our congestion study as well. The 4 urban areas we have done congestion studies. It's a congestion action plan, so to speak. It's a data-driven study that works as well on looking at bottlenecks and things like that. And then at the same time, our next steps will be going into the MPOs and the TPOs, like Senator Massey talked about. It's a partnership and it's a collaboration, with our local partners to build the best transportation system that we can to serve the needs of the folks that we represent. And the next steps for that is we'll start meeting with local officials and MPOs along with TDOT folks together in a room, start looking at some of the things there. There's suggestions, out of this study will be suggestions of things that we can do, but that we can move forward to look towards new projects in the future. They don't really have projects tied to it per se, but it gives us a good lens to look at that. Some other high-profile projects that are in the area that are coming as well. The Sharps Gap interchange, that's one that is a big need in our area. We're blessed with a lot of freight and a lot of other things. We're also blessed with a lot of vacation traffickers. If you ever, in the summers, look at our demands on all of our rural interstates, as well as in the urban area in Knoxville, you get a lot of backups on the I-75 Sharps Gap area, not just during the week, but on weekends during those travel demand areas as people are headed to the beach from up north or headed out west or east or whichever way they're going. And that's one that, basically the interstate goes down to one lane in each direction when you look at the ramps. That's a significant one that we're looking at building. These are large projects. We talked about lower level projects that are 40 and 50 million. This one's a $300 million project that may be done in 2 directions, but those are some of the things that we continue to look at. And I will say this, that we continue to also do what we call TISMO, and that's looking at the operational efficiencies of all of our system. And every time we touch it, whether it's a resurfacing program, we look, is there something that we can do with a small amount of money that can give us a good benefit, right? I-275, I-40 right there around where Alcoa Highway is, that's one we did a few years ago. It had a $50 million price tag for a future job. We were able to do it get 90% of the efficiency. That's right, 90% of the efficiency of that job with about a $4 million paving project. You know, that allows us to best use our funds and continue to look at our infrastructure for opportunities of that magnitude.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. And Jeff Welsh with TPO told me that on the interchange studies for Campbell Station and Watt Road, they'll be putting up those options for the public to view and getting public input. Mm-hmm. So the community can get involved. As related to the same topic, I wanted to ask you just if you could describe to us briefly, what are some long-term solutions for alleviating congestion?
Okay, I might have stepped into that with the first question a little bit, looking at some of the studies, but you're also looking at some of the local road network too that drives a lot of that. You know, we have a lot of projects, the Pellissippi Corridor north of town. You know, we always think about the completion of the corridor south into Blount County, but north of town, the 162 I-40 corridor, there are plans to obviously upgrade that, make it a more limited or complete controlled access facility going back towards Oak Ridge. Another opportunity to move a lot of traffic locally is we have a project along the 170 corridor, Edgemore Road. That's a large traffic generator. You know, if you're able to give local populations the ability to use a local network that's improved, and that takes some of the stress off your interstates for the through traffic as well. As I mentioned before, we're going to be widening a lot of our corridors that are leading into Knoxville as well. I-75 south of town in Loudoun County, we have a significant project. And then north of town, right there at Emory Road, headed north, we have a significant project there as well. That will widen the interstates in both of those areas to 6 lanes to help improve traffic flow there, as well as the I-81 interchange with I-40. We have a project that goes out to exit 4 and also helps improve that interchange as well. You know, looking at those capacity numbers as well. You know, obviously it's something that we continue to look at. It's a partnership with our local governments and our state officials and ourselves as we always continue to look at our transportation system. And see what other alternatives or needs are out there to be able to mitigate and to manage traffic and to look for alternatives for traffic as well to use. Okay.
Steve, thank you so much. I'm going to move on to our next topic, which is broadband. Excuse me. And I have with me Crystal Ivy with the KUB Fiber Broadband team. Crystal, people may know you as the former broadband director of our state. Can you tell us what you're doing now with KUB?
Yeah, absolutely, Nancy. Can you guys hear me? Yep. Okay, great. Thank you to the Chamber for having me today. You're right. You know, I did have the wonderful opportunity of serving as the state's broadband director for the last few years and kind of helping the governor establish a strategy on, you know, reducing broadband gaps across the state. And, you know, during that time, we awarded a lot of grant funding and had, you know, over 100 projects going on across the state to deploy broadband infrastructure out into unserved areas, and providers just on their own have done a great deal of deployment in the last few years. But, you know, even with all of that funding, there's still a lot more work to do. And so, you know, after working at the state level for a while on the issue, I was really excited to return home to see that I'm from East Tennessee. So I was excited to come back home. Nashville's great, but the Smoky Mountains, there's just no place like home. So I was excited to come back home and see that KUB had, you know, noticed that there was more work to be done and really stepped up to the plate. And I'm excited to focus on a community level and help KUB launch its fiber division. You know, as someone who has worked with providers all across the state, large and small and private and public, and deploying a variety of different types of technology, I can say with confidence that Knoxville and the surrounding area we're tremendously fortunate that we are getting ready to have this huge community asset and some of the fastest internet available today. And for me, specifically, I will be working on a few different things, but will be, of course, supporting KUB's process and applying for grant funding that we've mentioned on the panel a few times today, and also just collaborating with community partners and stakeholders like the Chamber and others, really just on ensuring that our community is prepared and is just well equipped to maximize this valuable asset once it's available.
Crystal, thank you. We're glad. excuse me. We're glad to have you here. You might have mentioned that you recently moved back here from Nashville, so welcome back to Knoxville. KUB decided earlier this year to offer broadband to all of its electric customers, residential and commercial. The plan was recently approved by the city. Why did KUB decide to add the service?
Yeah, we had been asked to look into the possibility of doing this by Mayor Kincannon and others. And after a lot of research and meeting with the community and community surveys and lots of gathering of data and information, working with the Boyd Center on determining the economic impact of a fiber project like this in the community, I think a few different conclusions were reached. One is that the fiber will improve our electric system performance, its reliability, and its efficiency, which I know is very important to chamber members and businesses in our community. But in addition to that, it directly impacts and helps reduce the digital divide by making broadband service available to unserved and underserved households that up to now have been left behind and are struggling without broadband, either because the infrastructure is just not available at their house, or maybe it is available, but for some other reason they haven't signed up for service. Maybe it's an affordability issue or some other reason. And so, we're very excited that this fiber project will support the community in just fully participating in the digital economy. The great thing about fiber and what I experienced on the state level in awarding grants for fiber to the home is that it's going to meet our needs currently, but it's also going to meet our needs in the future as they grow. And that's related to, distance learning and working from home and telemedicine visits with our doctor. I saw the other day a stat that in 2020, something like half of US households participated in at least one telemedicine visit. And, I also saw in the white paper in this Infrastructure Redefined paper that half of those who work in Knox County commute in, and another third who live in Knox County commute out. And certainly that impacts our transportation infrastructure, and fiber absolutely support making broadband available and work from home opportunities available, supports workforce development in our region. And lack of broadband should not be a reason why our neighbors are not accepting a job opportunity. So I think that's just one example of, why KUB decided to undertake this venture and how excited we are about this opportunity that this presents for the community.
Okay. And my next question is about the dollars that you had mentioned that we'll be receiving. Tennessee is expected to receive millions of new federal dollars to expand broadband coverage. Can you describe the impact it could have on our region? You touched on it briefly about telehealth. What else? How is it going to affect us?
Yeah. If I put my former state broadband director hat on for just a second and just say how excited I am. This is a truly historic level of funding for broadband. We've never seen anything like this on the state or federal level. $65 billion in the Infrastructure Jobs Act for broadband. Of course, that's not all for Tennessee. That's for the entire country. But a significant portion of funding from that legislation. And then a few months ago, the state announced another $500 million from its American Rescue Plan funds for broadband. So this is truly an unprecedented investment. And I think it highlights where we are nationally and in the state and in our community regarding broadband access. I think elected officials like Senator Massey and others and all of us have said, unreliable and slow and unaffordable broadband is just, that's not meeting our needs, is not acceptable anymore. And in my previous job, we awarded funds to connect communities all across the state. And we've talked about the Memphis Regional Mega Site a couple of times and Ford Landing on that site. A couple of years prior to that project landing, we actually awarded a grant for fiber to the home for the community that was the rural community that's adjacent to the mega site. So certainly there are a lot of reasons why a company lands on a site, but I think that's, again, just going to show a concrete example of how broadband can impact a community. And certainly, I think it goes without saying that the pandemic, we all have known for a while that broadband was important and that our communities without it were being left behind. But I think the pandemic just elevated the conversation to a whole new level as we were all trying to work from home and learn remotely. And it really just accelerated the need for faster and more reliable broadband in our area. And in the Infrastructure and Jobs Act specifically, I was really excited to see that there are several priorities listed in there that I think are going to be good for our region and good for the state. A few examples of that are speed. And the legislation prioritizes high-speed broadband, not just average broadband, but broadband that's going to meet our needs in the future, which is exactly what fiber to the home will do. It also talks about ubiquitous coverage, so serving every single household in an area, which from KUB's perspective is what we're doing in our electric service area, serving every household. And then something we haven't really talked about as much that the legislation speaks to is just making broadband more affordable for folks. We know that getting the infrastructure in place is the first step, but then once it's available, how do we make sure that our community can use it? And a lot of the broadband providers in our region have low-income programs. This is also something that KUB is working through the details on and has committed to developing a low-income program. Our program in particular will be offering free 1 gig service to Knox County student households that qualify. I think it just goes without saying that the digital divide disproportionately impacts low-income families who cannot afford broadband service. And so as a public utility, KUB is working to make sure that our families can afford it, our student families can afford it. I will just put a couple of important caveats on when we ask specifically about the impact that this broadband funding is going to have on our region. I think it's a little bit early to know exactly how much funding our community is going to receive. This funding is competitive, and so KUB will be applying as well as other providers in our region for this funding. And so just the sheer amount of dollars, I think it's safe to say is going to have a huge impact and will go a really long way in closing the digital divide. I think it will likely be directed to unserved areas, so households that don't have sufficient broadband and businesses that don't have sufficient broadband. For KUB specifically, I think it's important to note that we have committed already to serving our electric service area, and so regardless of whether there's any grant funding that KUB receives, we will be completing that project. But one thing that grants could potentially do for KUB and possibly other providers is expedite those builds. So help us get to areas more quickly, which we know that folks who were unserved needed broadband yesterday. So that's something that's important to note as well.
Okay, thank you, Crystal. Steve had talked about how smart technology is currently being used to help alleviate congestion. And can you tell us more about smart technology and why the fiber build out is so important in modernizing our city?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always look at it from an economic development lens because that's my background. But companies today require reliable high-speed internet to operate their businesses and compete in a global marketplace. And having fiber available throughout Knoxville and our surrounding area will ensure that our community has the technology assets necessary to support both new businesses that we recruit to come here and existing businesses as they grow. And for emerging technology specifically, I always think about the Internet of Things, the IoT. If you've never heard of that term, it's basically referring to all of the devices that we connect to our household internet. If you think about your phone, your spouse's phone, your kids' phones, your laptops and computers and gaming consoles and smart speakers. I mean, my thermostat at my house, I can control on my phone. And I was recently reading a study that in 2021, the average US household has 25 devices connected to its home internet. And that's double what the number was in 2019. So I think it's clear that the demands on our communications networks are going to continue to increase. And fiber to the home is the best technology to support that kind of bandwidth and the speeds that households are demanding today. And so that's a really long way of saying, the bottom line is that this fiber infrastructure is going to help Knoxville grow into the future.
Hey, Crystal, thank you so much for telling us what's going on with broadband. Next, we'll discuss housing and development. Debbie, I'm going to turn it over to you and Hanson.
Thank you. First, we want to lay the groundwork by discussing what's happening with home prices in our area. Where do we stand now, and what can we expect as prices continue? Are they going to continue to rise as rapidly as they have?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And, in the past year, from 2019 to 2020, the Knoxville metro area saw its population grow at 3 times the rate of the U.S. overall. And so we've seen this huge influx of people to Knoxville. We've also seen demographics that have all contributed to this surge in demand. And so we've seen home prices grow just in 2021, almost 20%. And if you're looking back to pre-pandemic times, home prices are about 35% higher than they were pre-pandemic. As far as looking forward, I don't foresee that rapid growth is going to continue. It's really just not sustainable. But that being said, I do think I anticipate that we'll see pretty modest price growth in 2022, probably above the national average, given the growth in migration to the area, as well as our limited supply. We are down in the last couple of months, have actually seen another surge in demand and fewer new listings. And so we're really just bottoming out. And until we see new supply injected into the market, it's likely that home prices will keep growing, but definitely not at the 20% rate that we've seen over the past couple of months.
According to Marketplace Graphics Research Group, builders, developers, and other entities across the United States, Knoxville has a problem with lot availability, as you were mentioning. What do you think can be done about increasing our lot availability?
Yeah, well, this is a really complex problem. You can't just buy a piece of land and build a house on it the next day. I mean, acquiring and preparing land for construction is a lengthy process. It can take, upwards of 1, 2, 3 years before it's ready to build. And years obtaining permits and installing sewer systems and paving roads before lots are ready to go. And so there's a couple ways to address that. Number one, a policy mechanism is, reducing minimum lot sizes in our zoning codes. That would allow us just to have a diversity of lot sizes and sort of maximize the land that we already have. And, it can sort of encourage some more of what we've seen in the research is that smaller minimum lot sizes can actually encourage and boost the affordable end of the new home construction market, which we've seen the new home market has disproportionately been pretty big homes that are quite expensive. And then on the other end of that, a huge part of lot availability really comes back to infrastructure. What is sort of frustrating is that running utilities to new developments is really cost prohibitive. And what we can see now in Knox County in particular is that a lot of the remaining open space in Knox County is located in areas with terrain where it's just inherently more expensive to put in the utility infrastructure, from sewage to gas lines to all of those different things. And so really trying to think about how we reduce the costs or even subsidize utility connectivity, and sort of also educating our community as to why building that out beforehand is important. And there's obviously been a lot of community opposition because they know that the development's coming, but educating people about how that can actually help their property values and improve their community is another piece of it. So there's a lot of different ways to attack that problem, and it will really take a multi-pronged approach.
It sounds like it. One thing being discussed relative to affordability is that Knoxville has an issue with missing middle housing. Can you explain that term and how we can get more?
Yeah, so missing middle housing is not altogether a new concept, but essentially missing middle is referring to a range of house scale buildings with multiple units. So essentially, building structures that are compatible in scale and form to a traditional single family home, but that also have multiple units. So we can think about that as duplexes, fourplexes, triplexes, cottage courts, multiplexes, all kinds of different forms. And it's essentially a mechanism to diversify our housing supply. A really big part of affordability in an area like Knoxville, and in an urban area where we've already built out a lot of our land mass, is we've got to maximize what space we do have and ensure that we have a number of different size units available. And this is also really helpful when it comes to walkability and sort of mixed land uses, and bringing some neighborhood commercial different types of developments in with neighborhoods. And so maybe you can walk to school or walk to a restaurant or walk to the grocery store. It's promoting that quality of life. And as far as getting more of the missing middle, the starting place is, quite frankly, we don't have very much of it. Relative to a lot of other places in the United States, a very, very small percentage of our housing stock is what is defined as missing middle. And the research shows us that the demand for missing middle is really sort of just huge. And really what that comes back to is our zoning codes and our land use policies. Is how do we create zoning codes and land use policies that are conducive to these types of developments, and also thinking about recruiting and building out, recruiting new builders who are specialized in this, and also providing what builders that we already have locally, potentially sort of some pilot programs with pre-built out design plans and things like that. So, really it does come back to the zoning code, but there are some ways that we can be proactive within our codes right now to also encourage more missing middle housing.
The shortage is not just being felt among the home buyers, but also the renters. The city has incentivized construction of several affordable apartment complexes. But what else should be done in this arena? Because I know it's really hard for the renters right now to find places.
Yeah, absolutely. We have seen rent growth. It's exponential right now. It seems to be slowing down. But it's important to acknowledge that we do need more affordable housing, but the need is not exclusive to affordable housing. We really have a large shortage of market rate multifamily housing. And I know we all sort of feel like apartment buildings are popping up everywhere in Knoxville, but we actually aren't building multifamily housing at the same rate. It's below the national average in Knoxville as far as new multifamily as per square footage wise. We're not building it as quickly, and a lot of that is, we are seeing a lot of new multifamily construction in the places where it's allowed. But again, this goes back to our zoning code and our comprehensive planning processes. Is we have to enable more multifamily construction. And it doesn't have to be huge apartment buildings, maybe 8, 10, 15, 20 unit apartment buildings at small scale, in different parts of Knoxville that are not just in the city center, but, along commercial corridors that can promote walkability and incentivize people to use different modes of transportation and things like that. So you're absolutely correct. The need for apartment complexes is pretty immense right now, but it's on the affordable and market rate side. And so thinking about how to do those both at the same time and sometimes within the same complex is really important, and something we should be really on the top of the list as well.
Sounds like a lot of these issues tend to focus back to zoning.
They do.
I think that was all the questions we had for you. Nancy, do you have any Q&As you want to?
We do. I think we have time for maybe a couple of questions. And the first one is probably for Steve. Is congestion an indicator for where we should and shouldn't be growing? And Hanson, you could maybe help with this question too. Could congestion be a guide for telling us where we should be holding off on further development?
For me, congestion is something that we look at that drives what projects we're going to do. We're not in the development side. I guess on our end, we're looking at where the development's at and then trying to meet the need. We also partner with our developers, those that are in the housing industry or commercial development. They actually help build or improve infrastructure in a lot of cases at the connection point of where they're at to help maintain our system. But congestion is a big focus, as well as safety, on where we start spending dollars and where we react to. Building out infrastructure, and I think Crystal talked a lot about broadband and fiber optics. We are currently working with Osprey right now to build a fiber optic network on our interstate right-of-way, which will help carry broadband throughout our ITS system. But at the same time, it'll give also an opportunity for fiber optic to be dropped off in some pretty rural areas across the state.
And I would just add to that, I don't think that it's a reasonable assumption to think that we can stop development per se. And when you want to build out from the areas where you have the congestion and improve infrastructure in those areas and continue to build out in the areas, adjacent to that, because if you incentivize development only in a place that's really far from where the congestion is, the infrastructure costs alone of that type of sprawl can be really prohibitive. And so really focusing on how we can develop well is really should be the priority, rather than thinking about where do we try to disincentivize development. And I'm not sure that it's really even possible to stop development in a broader sense.
Okay, and on that topic, someone also had a great question about how long people are driving 20 to 30 minutes to and from work, or from one county and living in another. In the white paper, we talked about that, how almost half of the people who work in Knox County commute from outside of the county. So this audience member asked, what transportation infrastructure and development policies are impacting, and how can policies be altered to help bring people closer to their work, recreation, and schools? And Steve, Hanson, Senator Massey, maybe you can address this question.
Can you kind of restate that, Nancy?
Yeah, they were asking what transportation or infrastructure or development policies are impacting the distances that people are driving, 20 to 30 minutes, and often from outside of the Knox County to go to work in Knox County. What policies can be altered to help bring people closer to their work and schools?
Well, there's been some major initiatives statewide through legislation and through budgetary means to encourage growth of businesses and jobs in the rural areas. Just over in West Tennessee, we've talked a lot about the Blue Oval. That's going to affect about an 18 county rural area that really just did not have that many quality jobs for people to stay in. So a lot of the people that live there would, or that grew up there, would move away when they became, after college or when they became an adult, or they had to travel for jobs. So just that coordination to at the state level to pass legislation to enable things like Blue Oval to develop where they are. I've told everybody I'm happy that we're getting that development in Tennessee to build our tax base, but we don't have to put up with all those people moving to our area. So that's just fine with me. But it's things like that encourage the growth in the business and the job developments in the rural areas, so people don't have to travel. It's initiatives like what Crystal has worked on at the state level to try to get broadband. We think of rural areas that don't have broadband. We don't think of Knox County being a rural area, but we have areas in Knox County that cannot get broadband. I mean, multiple areas in my district are without broadband. And we have neighbors that signed petitions and said, we want it, we're ready to pay, but there's not enough of a group, their population to have gotten it in the past. So it's things like that encourage the development, so people don't have to, so that their jobs where they live instead of where they have to go to.
Thank you, Senator.
I think that's a great point there, Senator. And one of the things that the department does alongside of that in helping the investment in rural areas, we're a rural state by and large, as Senator said. But the opportunities for people to be able to work and live in the same community. We have a state industrial access program that we do across the state that in some cases can be a very large type project, like a Volkswagen plant, obviously. But at other times, it may be a smaller industry like Campbell Manufacturing in Campbell County. It brings jobs. So when somebody's bringing a industry in, then we go help build some of the infrastructure, the last mile, so to speak, of roadway to help connectivity and transportation, and partner with them so that you can add that 200 jobs, 150 jobs, or 300 jobs to an area where people aren't driving the 45 minutes across two counties to try to go to work, but they have an opportunity in the community that they love and choose to live in. So, and I think as we continue to work on broadband, I think that's a big key as well, to have that technology and infrastructure there, along with the transportation opportunities, utilities, and those things that give the opportunity for those rural areas. We have our Appalachian corridors that we've been building for several years. It's a different type of transportation program. It's more of not like Field of Dreams, but if you build it, they will come. It's been very effective in building infrastructure on a pretty significant scale. It's a program that's been around for a long time out of the federal government. I'm finishing up some of the last projects. I'm letting in this month 2 sections of State Route 63 in Campbell and Claiborne County. But it's an opportunity to build infrastructure that has helped change some of those rural areas to allow more job opportunities in the communities they live in.
Steve, thank you. We have several other questions that we're not going to be able to get to, and they're all really good. So I'm going to send them out to the panelists and collect the answers, and we'll post them on our site along with the video of this panel discussion. So I'm going to turn it back over to Debbie to close us out.
Okay. I want to thank our audience for spending time with us this morning, and our panelists for sharing their knowledge and their insight. The Chamber created Infrastructure Redefined as a community strategy. Our residents, businesses, organizations, and local governments will all need to collaborate and act with a sense of urgency to take advantage of the newly passed federal infrastructure law. As noted in the strategy, now is the time of disruption where innovation and consumer preferences demand a fresh look at the necessary infrastructure to drive the regional prosperity. If you haven't already done so, I encourage you to read the Chamber's white paper at the knoxvillechamber.com under the Regional Enhancement Infrastructure area. This recording will be posted on the site within the next few weeks. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and happy holidays to everyone. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists.